G'day guys, and thanks for tuning in. Before we get started, this is actually the first video we've done with a face cam, so something new for a change. We'll see if it's a regular thing or not, but yeah, just thought I'd try it out, see how we go. Anyways, moving on to the video, we will be doing a lock knock pod segment. So I've done this before for BBL Supercoach, and so I thought I'd do it again for the AFL Supercoach, seeing as that video did quite well. So how it works is the lock is one must-have player for every team. The knock is one player who I would steer clear of, and the pod is a low ownership player who could potentially have a breakout year, or if they're just flying under the radar a bit. So yeah, we'll get started. The first team being the Adelaide Crows. So the lock for me is Jordan Dawson. Now Dawson's in at 550k. And is a pure defender. There's potential there for a full-time midfield role alongside Rory Laird. His durability is amazing. He hardly missed a game for the Swans. In his time at Sydney, he pushed up the ground. He could also move down back. He took kick-ins. But yeah, I think at the Crows, he will find a home in the midfield. That's where he played a lot of his junior years and also in the NEAFL. Speaking of the NEAFL, when he did play there, he averaged 136 points when he was in the midfield. So I think that's where his home will be for the Crows this year. And yeah, I think he should be a lock for most sides. And with the new rule changes regarding dual position, I think if he does find that role in the midfield, there's a good chance he could become a defender mid, which would be very handy. Moving on to the knock for the Crows, I'd probably say stay clear of Riley O'Brien this year. Had a good year in 2020, averaged 106, but yeah, dropped to 95 last year. Really didn't benefit having Laird in the midfield either, so not too sure what's up with Riley O'Brien, but I think there's definitely other options in that price range. I'm looking at the Big O and also Rowan Marshall. Still tossing and turning with my rucks. It's a bit tricky this year. And even Kieran Strawn might be competing with him. Played the 2 games last year and rucked really well. So I'd stay well clear of Riley O'Brien this year. The pod for the Crows, I have Matt Crouch. Crouch missed all of last year, but in the previous 4 years, he's averaged over 100 in every season. One of the best accumulators in the league. Obviously, there is that durability issue with his groins troubling him for all of last year, really. But yeah, he has been around that 600k mark in the past. So I think at 482k, a little risky, but see how he goes in the preseason. If he looks outstanding, he could be a fair pick. Moving on to the Brisbane Lions, the lock for them I have as Lachie Neale. This bloke's in over 50% of teams, and for good reason as well. He's averaged 100 plus for the last 7 years, and obviously coming off that Brownlow medal a few years back. Started last year at 720k, coming in this year at 540k. I think that's just criminally underpriced for Lachie Neale, and we all know how big he can go. So I think Lachie Neale is a must-have for all sides. He is definitely in my starting side this year. And I think he's the only must-have under 600k in the midfield. Harris Andrews is the one I would steer clear of for the Lions. Don't get me wrong, he's a great player, but I never like to pick key position defenders. The reason why they normally play the lockdown role, they don't run off half-back much. Andrews doesn't take that many kick-ins and gets the one-on-one every week. So a little bit inconsistent scoring there with Andrews. Never averaged more than 95, and I think for that low 500k price range, there's better options like Dale, Caleb Daniel, and Lachie Whitfield. And the pod for the Lions, I talked about him earlier, is the Big O. He's one that keeps coming in and out of my side. I'm really not sure with the rucks this year, but I think for those that don't want to pay that extra 100k or 150k really for Darcy or Gawn, the Big O could potentially have a breakout year. Now, I'm not saying he'll be as good as Gawn, Grundy, and Darcy this year, but I think the price is a big enough gap compared to the scoring. So I think the Big O will be. Sorry, I think the Big O is well priced. He won't average as much as the Big Three, but yeah, I think he's well valued. Averaged 110 after his bye. The only issue for me is Darcy Fort coming in to Brisbane and Hipwood being out. I think Fort and McInerney could rotate as that third key forward, which may affect his scoring a bit, but we'll see. Moving on to the Blues, the lock, the must-have is obviously Sam Walsh. Averaged 117 last year, and I think he's only going to get better. He's still young. He's 20 years old. I like his chances at a Brownlow in the next few years, and yeah, super consistent, hundreds every week. Never really goes too massive, but definitely has that capacity. But yeah, 100 to 125 is what you can expect from Walsh every week, and super safe pick, super durable. One to definitely stay clear of is Zach Williams. Never again. We've picked him once at GWS, and yeah, I'm never touching this bloke again in my side. 461k, shocking value for what he's worth. He misses games. He's made of what's the saying? Anyways, he's not durable at all. He never has a consistent role. You know, he plays halfback some weeks. He'll play half forward the next week. Only the 3 tons last year. Yeah, I'm not keen on Zach Williams at all. And the pod for the Blues is Adam Chera, their new recruit. Still young, has star potential, I think, especially in new colours. Fingers crossed we get to have a look at him in the midfield, inside mid in the preseason, and see how he goes there. But yeah, good durability, good young player, pretty consistent. I like Chera, and I think he's one of the players that could have a breakout year. Moving on to the Pies, the lock I've chosen is Grundy. The other one is Nick Dacos, purely because everyone's got him. But Grundy averaged 115 plus the last 4 years. Fairly safe option when you're comparing him to Gawn and Darcy. Has a huge ceiling. Yeah, he went 130 plus 8 times last year, and I think he's got the upper edge for me this year over Gawn, purely because Gawn will have that competition with Luke Jackson this year. So for me, Grundy he will be in my team come round 1. The knock for the Pies for me is Steele side bottom, price at 475,000. Age is starting to become a factor for Steele. He's regressing as he continues to play. He's definitely not getting any better, and I think the Pies are well and truly into their rebuild now. I think they're going to prioritise getting midfield minutes to Josh Dacos, potentially Nick Dacos, and then blokes like Lipinski, Finn McRae. I think side bottom will only play in the forward line this year, so I don't think he's worth a shout pushing that 500k mark. I think he's quite overpriced and doesn't have that scoring ceiling like he used to. Pod for the Pies, Taylor Adams. Decently priced at 516, but for me, I don't really want to pick anyone cheaper than Lachie Neale. He's the really only one under 600k that's worth looking at, in my opinion. But he's been consistent, scores of 95 over the last 7 years. Good ball winner, and if he can stay fit and does play midfield minutes for the Pies this year, he's pretty underpriced. But he's not top 8 this year, and yeah, not for me. Moving on to the Bombers, the lock for the Bombers I have as Jordan Ridley. one of the best intercept markers in the league, and he's only got like 50 games under his belt or something like that. So he's only up from here. With the addition of Jake Kelly, that should free up Ridley to that intercept role more. He found himself playing that 1v1 lockdown role a few times last year, which hurt his scores. But yeah, Ridley must have, in my opinion. I'm pretty sure he will be a top 6 defender this year, so he's in my side. I'd steer clear of Jake Stringer this year. With McGrath, Shield, and Caldwell all coming back and having a good preseason, I think Stringer will see hardly any midfield time at all, and I think he goes back to that forward role and drops to around the 80, 85 average maybe. So at 506k, not for me, too overpriced. Last year he was good value, but this year, this is top dollar for Stringer, and I don't think we'll see that role of inside mid for the rest of his career. And a pod for the Bombers is Dylan Shield, coming off an injury-affected year last year. He's at 360k. So 7 years now, he's averaged over 90, which is pretty good for someone at that price range. Pretty consistent scoring, but with those Bombers coming back, McGrath, Parrish is now a full-time midfielder, Merritt. I don't think Shield will have a permanent role in the midfield. I think he will more be a rotational guy. Moving on to the Dockers, a lock for them is Sean Darcy. Without a doubt, a top 3 ruckman in a league. Some would say he's the best. Some would say Gawn's better. I'm not sure. That's why I've just gone with top 3. But yeah, I think Darcy is up there in the elite status now. 14 tons last year with 6 scores of 140 plus. Had a few 190s, 180s. It was ridiculous. But yeah, he's only 23 years old. He gets around the ground pretty well for a big man, and yeah, I think Darcy has a lot of potential still in him, and I'm tempted to pick him, but he's very expensive, but for good reason. So Darcy is a lock. Definitely stick clear of Nat Fyfe, at least for the first half of the year. We all know he's going to miss games. He's got poor durability. Those shoulders are not looking too good these days. And I reckon he'll rotate more through the forward line with that young midfield. You know, you've got Jordan Clark, you've got Brayshaw, Sarong, Will Brodie. So my hopes is that he does play forward and eventually gets forward status, which would be very handy. And then I reckon he would be worth a shout, but definitely not while he's only got that midfield status. The pod for the Dockers, for me, Caleb Sarong. I think 451 is another awkward price, but I do think this guy has elite level potential. Last year they used him a bit as a tagger in the first half of the year, and then towards the end of the season switched to more of that accumulator role, and yeah, the scores really started to pile up. His last 7 games, 5 of them were over 100. So I think Sarong's one to look out for, but not for me. If you're looking for a mid-pricer who could potentially break out, Sarong's not a bad shout. Moving on to the Cats, the lock for them is Mitch Duncan, purely because of his DPP status. So the forwards this year are pretty shocking, but that's what we've come to expect for the last few years. So I think Duncan and Dunkley are the only real two with huge scoring potential in the forward line. So I think durability is a little bit of an issue with Duncan, but he's pretty versatile. He goes back, he plays wing, he can kick goals. So I think he's one to look out for, but yeah, a little bit injury prone these days. But with the weak forwards this year, it's almost worth taking a risk on Mitch Duncan. One to miss this year for me is Tom Stewart. Had foot surgery in August. Obviously missed the last 5 games for the Cats. Many players who have had the same injury as Stewart. I'm not exactly sure what it's called off the top of my head. Anyways, they haven't gotten back to their best footy, so that's a little bit of a concern for Stewart. I still think he'll be a good player, but when there's that little bit of uncertainty, I think 585k is a little bit much to pay up for a bloke who might not be the same. So yeah, Tom Stewart is a miss for me this year. I don't think he's worth a shout this year. A pod for the Cats is Paddy Dangerfield. Not many people are picking blokes under 600k this year, apart from maybe Lockie Neal, but Dangerfield is in that price range. The last 10 years he's averaged 100 plus, which is ridiculous. He's still got a good ceiling, but I would hang off on Dangerfield to see if he does get that forward status later on in the year, because if he does, I think we can lock him in for a top forward. And yeah, so I wouldn't touch Dangerfield, but see how he goes and see if he does get that forward DPP. Moving on to the Suns, the lock for them is Touk Miller. Up in the elite status with McRae, Oliver and Steele. Dropped below the ton just 3 times last year and had 10 scores of over 130. So yeah, I don't think there's really any downside to this pick at all. They've lost Greenwood, which definitely won't make Touk any worse. If anything, that makes him even better. But yeah, Touk Miller, I really want him in my team, but I can't pick all 4 of McRae, Oliver and Steele, so Touk has to sit out. But yeah, Touk is, you can't go wrong with Touk at all. I'm not actually too certain around Matt Rao this year, even at that discounted price. He has not looked anything like anything like the footy we saw in year 1 after he had that shoulder injury. And it's not like he came back last year for a few games and his scoring was down. He played 13 games and only cracked 80 twice. So I think Matt Rao's really struggled with that shoulder, and if he goes down again, it could be another season ended. So I think Matt Rao is. I love Matt Rao, and I hope he does well, but he's too risky to pick for me, unfortunately. But yeah, see how he goes in the preseason. And the pod for the Suns, for those who don't want to pay up for one of the premium rucks, is Jared Witts at 380k. Comes in at a very discounted price after that ACL tear. Before that injury, he averaged 90 plus in 3 seasons, 99 in one of them. So he can pretty much crack the ton, but I think there's a little bit of risk there with that ACL. If he was 280k, I'd consider him, but 380k, I think it's not cheap enough for a pick if you're not going one of the top rucks. So for me, Witts is a miss. Moving on to the Giants, the lock I have as Lockie Whitfield. Really cheap for Whitfield, 502k, and he's got that DPP. Has that really good scoring history, and if he stays fit, I think he will. You can lock him in for a top 6 defender this year, and yeah, that DPP is always handy to have, especially if you're picking someone like Jack Crisp, or even you've got a loophole like Warner or Euland. I think he'll be really handy to have, and he's in my side. He should be in almost everybody's side, I'd say. Toby Green, don't get me wrong, he's a good footy player, but yeah, out for the first 6 games, I think it is, and we all know he's a bit of a hothead, so there is that risk he does get suspended for something else at some point. So not for me. I can never really trust Toby to keep his head together. So yeah, I've got him as the knock for the Giants. The pod I have is Josh Kelly. I think he's fairly well priced for what we've seen from him in the past. He does have that capacity to go 200. And for someone that's around 100k cheaper than the big 3, big 4 if you count Touk as well, I think he could be worth a shout, but there is always a little bit of durability concern, and last year Leon Cameron had him in the half forward line, which was also a bit of an issue. So yeah, Josh Kelly, probably not for me this year, but I do like him and could be worth a shout. For the Hawks, the only real lock I've got for them is Tom Mitchell. He's averaged 110 the last 4 years. Best ball winner in the league. The only issue is his ball usage. High ceiling, and he's been surprisingly very durable even after that broken leg. So I think Tom Mitchell, you can pencil him in for tons most weeks. And yeah, just a great ball winner. I'd like to get him in at some point, but not a starting pick for me. I do want to get him when he's a little bit discounted. One to miss this year for the Hawks, for me, is James Sicily. I'm perfectly happy not picking this bloke. Coming back after a season out on the sidelines, there is uncertainty over his role. Last year, Impey, CJ Hardwick, Scrimshaw and Day, they all sort of chipped into that role, running off halfback, intercepting. So I don't really see where Sicily slots in there. He's got injury history, suspension history. So I think even at that price, 448k is just a little bit risky for me. And yeah, too much uncertainty there. Now this is an interesting one in my opinion. The Pod, Max Lynch, their recruit from Collingwood. I think he's got a potential role to be their full-time ruckman this year. With Segler leaving to the Cattery, I think one of Lynch and Reeves will pick up that full-time ruck role. McAvoy likes to go back. He likes to go forward. He's getting a bit old now to keep that ruck load up for the whole game. So I think if Lynch gets that upper edge over Reeves this preseason, I think he's one to watch, especially for R3, maybe even some people's R2. But yeah, fingers crossed Lynch can shine in the preseason and yeah, get that role for the Hawks. Moving on to the Ds, the Premiers, I've got Clayton Oliver as the lock. No surprise here. Still young, still getting better, you'd say. 120 average last 2 years. Absolute gun, ball winner, super durable. I've got him as a set and forget. You can just put him in your side now and leave him there all year, and yeah, he should just provide week in, week out, big tons, and yeah, went 200 plus last year. Fingers crossed he can pull that off a few more times this year. The knock for the Ds I've got as Jack Viney. They didn't really have a standout knock, so I've just gone with Viney. Struggles to score big like he used to with Petraka and Clary in the form of their life in the midfield. And also Luke Dunstan coming over from the Saints. I don't think that helps Viney at all. Yeah, he's not a very relevant Supercoach player, but I think they didn't really have anyone worth putting down here, so I've just gone with Jack Viney. But yeah, last year he dropped off 16 points from his 2020 average, so shouldn't be in anyone's side this year. And their Pod, Luke Jackson, comes in at under 400k with that ruck forward DPP. He should increase his ruck load every year now. I think he's Gawn's successor, and yeah, Max Gawn will slowly decrease his ruck load and increase his forward time. So yeah, Jackson's also put on a bit of muscle and improved his fitness this year. So I think he could be quite a handy ruck forward to have. And yeah, not for me, but he's a good price. The forwards are looking a little bit shallow this year, so could be a decent option. Moving on to North, the lock for them is Aaron Hall. Really found a home down at fullback. Just runs all game. He's their primary ball user. Takes most of the kick-ins. Zeeble takes a few, but in that fullback role last year, he averaged 115. if he keeps the role this year, 100% top 6 defender again. Hugh Greenwood is one I probably wouldn't touch this year for North. He's only got that midfielder status, and there is speculation that he might be played as the third tall for North alongside Larkey and CCJ. So, yeah, if those rumours are true and we don't see him get any midfield time, he is definitely one to steer clear of. And the pod for North is LDU Luke Davies-Uniacke. Big body midfielder. Unfortunately, Cunnington's had his battles with cancer, so with Cunnington potentially out for the long term, he may see full-time midfield. So he could be one to watch. Again, not for me, but yeah, relatively well priced. See if he has a breakout year. Moving on to Port Adelaide, with the really shallow forward line this year, I've got the lock being Zach Butters. Really well priced for a bloke that's said to be playing midfield this year. So fingers crossed that's true, and he does get that full-time mid-role. Yeah, I think he's top 6 easily if he does play midfield. So Zach Butters is a lock for me. Robbie Gray wouldn't touch this year. Past his prime, and he's definitely on the way down. He did get midfield minutes here and there last year, but I don't think his body can cope with that moving forward. So Robbie Gray, he's still at that 450k price mark. I don't think we'll see him much higher than that, as I think he is on the way down and on his last legs. So yeah. And the pod is Ollie Wines. If you're looking for your last primo midfielder and you can't afford one of the top dogs, Wines is worth a shout. Awesome player fantasy-wise, but that ball usage slightly does impact him Supercoach-wise. So, yeah, for me, he's one I'll potentially look at throughout the season, but not a starting pick for me. Moving on to the Tigers, the lock for me, it was between Dusty and Short, and I think Dusty is a little too up and down, so I've gone Jaden Short here at 535k. He'll be the primary ball user without a doubt now with Hooley's retirement. Should take all the kick-ins. He doesn't have a huge ceiling, but I think it's safe to say you can expect 90 to 105 from him most weeks. So for a D5, D6 come the end of the year, he should be a pretty safe pick to start. That's why I've got him as the lock. I don't think he's a top 6 defender, but yeah, pretty consistent player. Shai Bolton is one that I wouldn't pick this year. Picked him last year, made that mistake, cost me a few finals. He's too up and down with his scoring. Sometimes he goes forward and does nothing. Sometimes he goes into the midfield and has a good passage of play, and then you won't see him again for the rest of the game. So I think Shai Bolton's a bit too up and down, and with blokes like Dusty and Prestia coming back into the side, I think he'll see less CBAs and more high half forward minutes. So for me, I'd steer clear of Shai Bolton. And the pod for the Tigs I have as Jack Graham. Great durability, elite tackler, DPP status, pretty well priced, and I'm a Tigers fan. I'm hoping Jack Graham steps up as the next captain. So yeah, fingers crossed he has a breakout year and yeah, takes on a good leadership role. Moving on to the Saints, the lock is no question Jack Steele. Averaged 120 plus the last 2 years, and yeah, if he stays free of injury, he will 100% be a top 5, maybe even top 3, maybe even the top midfielder this year. So yeah, every week with Jack Steele, you can expect big tons. He's a great captaincy option, and yeah, does everything at an elite level. Ball use, tackling, can kick goals. Love him. I love Jack Steele. Hunter Clark is one that I am never keen on picking. He's been in the league for 4 years now and hasn't had that breakout year, hasn't taken his game to the next level. Every season he gets rumoured to have midfield time, but it just never gets it. And until it's confirmed heading into round one that he will play midfield, I don't think he's a worthy shout, and I think he's a bit of a trap. Now the pod is Rowan Marshall. Now I've got two scenarios here for what happens with Rowan. The first one being Ryder doesn't play, and Marshall is their primary ruckman, stays with only ruck status and scores at an average of around 110 to 115. Scenario 2, Ryder does play. Marshall spends time down forward, gets forward status midway through the season, and will be a top 6 forward, averaging around that 105 mark. So I reckon either way it's a win-win. So Rowan Marshall is one that I'm definitely considering, and he's one to watch for me this pre-season. I think he could have a really good year. Moving on to the Swans, the lock for me is Jake Lloyd. Had a good year last year, still averaged over 100, and now with Dawson leaving, Lloyd is now free to control that back line again like he used to when he averaged 120. I think Lloyd's just the seagull. He's super consistent, and yeah, you can expect hundreds every week from Jake Lloyd, so must have for me. The knock for me is Josh Kennedy. He's nearly 34 years old. He's on the way down, and I think with guys such as Heaney, Rowbottom, and Chad Warner all being rumoured to have more midfield minutes, I think Kennedy starts to play a little bit less time in the midfield and more as that mentor and just a leader for the younger blokes. So I think Kennedy's passed at Supercoach wise, but yeah, still a good player, but not one to pick this year. And a pod is Isaac Heaney. Has decent scoring history with 90 plus in 4 of his last 5 years. Is apparently training with the midfield group and is likely to play more mid minutes this year. Consistency has been a problem for him in that forward line, but if he does finally make his way into a more senior role in the midfield, he could be a really good value pick this year. Now West Coast, I was just looking through their list trying to find a primo lock, and there's no one that really stood out to me. So I think the only one that you must have is a rookie, mature ager, Greg Clark, already 24 years old, should be playing a good level of footy. Hopefully he debuts round 1. I think that's what everyone's hoping for. And yeah, big body midfielder. Played in the Waffle last year and averaged 27 disposals a game. So yeah, hopefully he can be a good rookie and have good job security this year for us. And the knock for the Eagles I have as Shannon Hearn. He's already 2 years past his best footy and he's only going to head downhill from here. I think Witherden will take on more of that responsibility with the ball use off half back. And I think, Hearns on his last legs, wouldn't be surprised if this is his last or second last year. And the pod for the Eagles, again, couldn't really find a real standout here. There's not many Supercoach relevant players for the Eagles, but I've got a little bit of an outlandish pick here, Willie Rioli. So apparently he's the fittest he's been in his career, and it looks like he'll have a high half forward role and maybe push up to some clearances as well. So at 225k, if we can't trust any of the forward rookies come round 1, I think Rioli could be worth a shout, but pretty awkward price range for someone who hasn't scored in the past. So see what his role's like in pre-season and go from there. And the final side is the Western Bulldogs. Jack Macrae was the best scorer last year, led the whole league in terms of Supercoach scoring. 120 plus average the last 4 years, super consistent, hundreds 9 times out of 10. Awesome captain option as well. Should be in every side. He's in my side. Set and forget for Jack McRae. Absolute gun. Love him. Adam Treloar is one that I will steer clear of this year, even with that DPP status. It's hard to score when that doggies midfield when they all go big every week. It's amazing how they do it. But yeah, Treloar hasn't really found that midfield role with Bontempelli, McRae, Libba, Smith, Hunter. It's just, yeah, he's found himself in that forward role more, and there's a bit of a durability issue there with Treloar, and I think it's a little bit risky picking him if we can't count on him getting midfield time. So Treloar's a no for me. And the final player we have on this segment is the pod for the Bulldogs, and that is Caleb Daniel. Had a great year in 2020, averaging 100. Fingers crossed he can bounce back this year. He should be their main ball user as well, one of the best kicks in the league. So see how he goes pre-season. Had a slow start to last year, but finished really strongly and was good in the finals. So Caleb Daniel, 510k, pretty well priced for me. I'll see how he goes. I might look to get him in at some point throughout the year. Anyways, that wraps up this segment. This did take a long time to make, so if you're feeling generous, please leave a like or any comments. But yeah, if you did tune in, appreciate it, and yeah, see you later.